Trust isn't earned through words, it's built through presence, integrity, and follow through. And in today's episode of Be Unmessable With the podcast, I am joined by the insightful and powerful Shaun Mader to unpack why trust is the cornerstone of great leadership and how to intentionally build it in a world that's constantly testing it.
Hey there, welcome to Be Unmessable with the podcast. I'm your host, Josselyne Herman-Saccio, and today my guest is Shaun Mader. He's an old friend, but he's also a speaker, a coach, a facilitator, and he has an expert team at his company, Trusted Leadership, and what they do is they dive deep to transform challenges into opportunities. So they craft dynamic talks, they customize programs, they create engaging workshops to propel organizations and teams beyond their barriers. And together, they're on a mission to unlock breakthrough results, cultivate inclusive cultures, and spark a new wave of innovation within organizations. So I'm so thrilled that he said yes to being on the show today. Welcome, Shaun.
Hi, Jocelyn. Great to be with you.
Great to see you. I know it's been
Yeah.
so long since we've been in person at least, but it's
Oh my
nice to see
God.
you virtually. Your pixels. It's nice to see
Yes.
your pixels.
I promise I'm real.
Yes. So tell us how you ended up doing what you're doing, and working with organizations to transform their cultures. Tell us how you ended up doing this.
Uh, I think it's pretty common that people in this role have, nobody has a normal path. You don't go to school and train. I came to it by accident. As you know, I used to be a photographer for many years. I used to make commercials and music videos. My whole life was on the media side, which you and I have in common. Um, but then somewhere along the way, doing a lot of personal development, I'd do these crazy things. I'd go off to India and live like a monk in between shooting hip hop videos and Fashion Week and all sorts of weird
Oh
stuff.
my God. Talk
So,
about a contrast.
yeah, well, you know what? I think there is this thing in life where contrasts can be very defining. You really can see things when you go onto the opposite ends of the spectrum. And that was happening for a long time. And there was this battle between doing those monastic interludes where I would have a lot of peace and equanimity, and my chronic pain symptoms all went away. And then I'd come back and I felt like I'd throw it all away. And
Mm.
so over the years, I was exploring more and more personal development. And as you might know, went from being kind of a pain in the butt participant to becoming a leader of a lot of transformational leadership programs. And it was through that I started to realize that there was a bigger difference to be made at the level of organization. That whatever I was doing with photography was great, and I'm very proud of some of the work I've done, but there was something different about making an actual impact in actual people's lives. And it was through that whole process that my chronic pain and migraines went away. I started to connect with a higher purpose, not even in the religious sense, but I really saw that my biggest areas of complaints, like I would never want to go work in some stuffy office setting, suddenly became the place where I could actually make the most difference and bring about work cultures that really worked for people and worked for business's bottom line.
So you don't have to go to the stuffy work culture because you transform the culture.
Exactly. In fact, we just came off of a week of working with a whole group where it was just amazing to watch people connect their work to the larger aspects of their life and start to see that how they interact with each other at work gives them their self-expression and contributes to the quality of their life. And for me, that was always this massive uh, division that I think was costing individuals and costing companies so dearly, but it was kind of one of those blind spots. So I think people are coming around, especially after COVID, to realizing that there's a way to unify these things that actually is good for both individuals and business.
And talk a little bit more about that. So when you go into a company and you work with people to shift the culture to like a purpose-driven culture, a
Hmm.
purpose-connected culture, what is the first thing that you tackle? What do you discover what have you discovered needs to get addressed primarily?
Well, as you know, somebody who's led many, many, many transformations, um, you can't catapult people from one place to another. You actually have to go through the process. So I hate to say, I wish there was a fast way, but you first have to deal with all the crap that's in the space to begin with. People have to grapple with what's already there. And even though I think we always want to get to the results, the real magic is in getting present and dealing with what's in the space. And only then can you start to unpack it and create space for something new. But as you know, what's always there for people after you go through that process is what's authentic, what's actually really wanted by people. And it always comes back to the same human drivers that, again, makes for enriching lives and makes for enriched businesses. So the process, I wish we could just say everybody had an appetite for purpose and doing all this stuff, but really they're usually facing a legitimate business challenge and they really don't know how to achieve it. So the journey to that ultimately becomes that journey.
It's what I usually say. You can't put icing on mud and call it a cake. It might look like a cake, but it is not a cake. You got to deal with the mud first.
Yeah,
And that's the thing I've found people do resist. They just want to skip through. They're like, okay, I just want to forget about that,
yeah.
and now just create. But that's not possible because first you have to have space or a nothing in which to create. And that's the pathway to nothing is through the crap, so to speak.
Well, I mean, it's a timeless symbol too. You think of like in Eastern religions, they talk about the lotus, but it comes from the mud. Like there's always been this struggle, and I think that if there's, you've got so many people to your credit that would say that I once I got the courage to deal with my crap, everything became easier. And the thing that you wanted to avoid the most became the real access to your own success. And I think that,
Which is what you're saying with the stuffy office, is the
yeah,
access to your success to make the impact that you wanna make. Amazing, isn't it?
yeah. And well, I think you were maybe the person who first introduced agreement reality to me, and how I think a lot of us just take on like, well, I walk into any environment and this is how people act, or this is how you get ahead here. So therefore, I must be like this, even if it costs my happiness, my freedom, my joy, all of that.
Well-being
Yeah,
well-being is a big one for people in big
huge.
companies because they end up in the system, which you could call the culture or the agreement reality. And most people don't, it doesn't occur for them, at least tell me if you found this, it doesn't occur for most people at a company to go, oh, well, I could transform the culture because this is like, no, this is the culture. And I
Yeah.
have to adapt to it, not create anything new and have people jump into that game. It's more like, how do I play this game effectively, which equals survival to some degree.
Well, I there's especially in the consulting world, there's a saying out there that nobody ever got fired for hiring McKinsey, and what that speaks to that larger theme that people are incentivized to make safe judgments and decisions.
Yes.
People are never rewarded for taking a risk or going out on a skinny branch to say, you know what, I know this isn't common, but I think we should go in a different direction here. And so I think with that's where organizations get really challenged. You're not rewarded for saying, hey, I think we could take a new direction here. So it starts to breed this monoculture that tends to miss where the real value could be made. And that's a leadership conversation for me, honestly. It's really, especially with executives, are you creating the conditions in which people can do things that are safe to fail kind of experiments? Are they
Yeah.
able to bring up new ideas and have people interact with them? And especially now that things are moving so fast, things are changing with AI culturally. I think a lot of people are really grasping at straws as to how to move forward with any kind of sense of unified vision.
And what do you find in the work that you do with people messes with people the most from being able to get into that world of vision?
It's the people around them. It comes back to these same humanistic things. I think in everybody's quest to find a quick solution and to get a quick result, people are very quick to swap people out and change and pivot without dealing with what phases of change look like for people or what's the impact when you just suddenly shake things
You're
up without
fired.
any. Yeah, you're fired. I got some new person. They come in with edicts, and people feel like this sense of whiplash. So when they look around at the people around them, they don't feel confident that they can go have a different kind of conversation. They don't see that if I have a great idea, if my manager is going to shoot everything down, or if I know that they're going to take credit for it, or there's no reason for me to even be worrying about the enterprise as a whole, you get people showing up just to get through the day. And they make their calculation about, is this enough money for me to put up with this kind of burden? And you see that in all the statistics. Average time in a position, especially for millennials and Gen Z, it's hovering around 2 years. You've got 70% of
Wow.
employees who are unengaged. You have 17% who are actively unengaged, which means they're actually doing damage to your business. And it's been such a pervasive condition for so long that I think we've all accepted that that's just how it is. But when you see these companies who have had these major breakthroughs, who are the exception to the norm, you notice every single time they're dealing with their people first.
Hmm.
They make it a people first culture, and nobody can figure out why they're the ones that are, you know, creating gains when everybody else is losing, or when a downturn comes that they're suddenly capitalizing on. So I think the time is right to start to have these conversations, because I think people are looking for a different way. They just don't know how.
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, I always say, I mean, and I'm not the one who created this, but if you don't know how to do something, the question really is who does. So you don't have to know how, as long as you can get to somebody who does. And I think a lot of companies, especially CEOs, founders, that kind of level of, like the C-suite level, oftentimes feel they have to know everything.
Hmm.
So they don't go for, okay, who could innovate this system, this culture? Who could I bring in that is an expert in that? Because a lot of the experts that get brought into companies are basically to reinforce what's already there.
That can be a real danger. That's actually an area where we have to coach people around a lot, especially for executives, because on one hand, there's this pressure to, we have this idea of leadership. You have to know. Well, when people know that you don't know and you're acting like you do, you're actually shooting yourself in the foot. No matter how
Yeah,
hard you
it's
try,
detrimental.
this is just downward spiral. The other side we see is that there are really amazing leaders who have a knowledge base, a sensibility. They really are fantastic and amazing in their role. What their challenge is, they don't know how to scale that so that they have a network of other leaders around them who can participate
Yes,
with them, and they find themselves really burdened by not being able to expand and replicate that kind of understanding. So that's a lot of
it's the
the work
biggest
we do,
thing. It's burnout.
right? And that's the leaders are doubly tasked with addressing their employees' burnout while they're dealing with it themselves.
Yeah, I work with that a lot, a lot with a lot of also partners where we co-create projects to impact leadership and burnout because leaders, I like what you said about that. It's like there's this image of leadership where you have to know, but that's almost the opposite of real leadership
Yeah,
because if you think of leadership as a space, not a person or a quality, but a space. How big can you have that space? How many people can emerge and rise up in that space? So for me, and I know we come from a similar background about this in terms
yeah.
of our education and transformation, but that, leadership is about being a clearing in which leaders can show up. So my judgment of how good a leader I am is how many great leaders do I have around me, not how much I know, how many awards, how many blah, blah, blahs or whatever. It's all about who's around me, which goes back to what you said that messes with people is the people around them. It's really kind of full circle.
There's something interesting came up recently that I think really hits this on the head. I was working with an executive, and they were just dealing with a lot of the stuff that happens in a high-powered environment as a financial big bank, and they were getting really stuck in the day-to-day politics and drama. And they knew that the conversation was something about their leadership. And I need to be a better leader. I need to do this. And the big contextual shift that really sparked a new way of seeing things was, well, what if you were had to constitute yourself as being a leader of leaders? And suddenly it took the whole thing away from trying to control outcomes and trying to move ahead and get
I
people
love it.
to submit to their authority, which, just trying to get
The
people in
worst
line.
thing you could do, then you make yourself not you need to make yourself obsolete, like that dating app
Right.
designed to be deleted.
Exactly. Well, and look, that's where leaders also have to confront that ego that comes in there, that they do want yeah, we deal with this all the time. People do want the credit. They do want the accolades. And that's not a bad thing. But when people start to see the cost of that to their own well-being, I think that's where there's some new space starts to open up
Yeah.
to really expand.
It's like addiction, until you hit bottom, you're not going to change your behavior. So I think for leaders, the hitting bottom is usually some sort of exhaustion, burnout, overwhelm, that kind of. It's got to be physical because conceptually it doesn't compute. If it did,
Right.
the whole setup would be different. Yeah. Very interesting. So given this podcast is called Be Unmessable With, and you've been, engaged with me for enough years to know that's
Mhm.
my whole mission is to
Yep.
empower people to be unmessable with in life, no matter what life is throwing at them. I always ask my guests to tell us about a time when you were dealing with a really challenging, difficult circumstance in your life that could have messed with you to the point of taking you out of that game or you down for the count, but it didn't because you were able to bring something to bear that had you emerge unmessable with. So tell us about some time in your life where that was the case.
Well, I'm really thinking back. So this transition from being a photographer to doing this kind of work all happened leading up to and involving COVID. And I saw this great meme out there. It says, "We don't do things because they're easy. In much smaller script, we do things because we thought they'd be easy." So, I thought I thought I was going to make this transition, and I had what I thought was my dream job lined up, working with some people I really respected, and suddenly everything got caught up in some legal matter, some non-compete issue. And months went
Ugh,
by, and I was hanging out there, and I was like, "Come on," and everything fell apart. So instead of one or the other, I was left with neither, and it was devastating. And it was a huge loss of identity. It was a huge loss of ego and who I thought I was. I'm like, well, then I felt really out there on my own. And I noticed that gotten very, it took me a while, but I noticed I got very fixated on how it was going to look.
mm,
I had this job with these people, and that was going to be my future. When that went away, of course, then the oh, you're screwed or you're on your own, all those thoughts come in. And I'd like to say I snapped myself out of it the same day, but it didn't go that way. Um, what I really had to get is that there's an underlying commitment to all of that. And it allowed me to look back at my life and see, well, what was my actual commitment in all this? And I can trace it all the way back through all the work I've done, whether it was in filmmaking or as a photographer. It was always about people and my curiosity about people, my genuine desire to want to have an impact. And when I got retuned up around that, suddenly new opportunities started to open up, working with
mm.
other people who are doing great work, collaborating, having different conversations with potential clients. And instead of trying to fit into what I thought people wanted, it gave me this access now to stick true to what my underlying vision was. And of course, it also meant reaching out and getting coaching and reaching out to my network of people because, I'm left to my own devices. I'm a very reliable loner. So,
Well, I think that's key what you're saying as one of the things that brought you through that space from what could have been a low point to moving through it is people around you, which goes back to what you said messes with people that you work with. So it's a theme for you is
yeah,
people. and if it's always about the people, it's you've got to be surrounded by people who are going to lift you out of those spaces when life is throwing stuff at you that could take you down.
Well, I think you run mastermind groups and coaching people, and I just came from a leadership retreat in Vermont, and it it's worth recognizing the difference when you're around a group of people or have people in your life who you know are in that constant challenging path of elevating themselves, because the conversations are just elevated. It helps bring me out of my own funks, and that they have that network of people. You just get them on the phone, and when you know that you can switch in and out so quickly, it suddenly becomes less and less of an issue when you find yourself down and out or feeling doubting yourself and all of that. So it, when I run into people who don't have that infrastructure around them, I start to really, I feel terrible for them sometimes, but I feel very grateful for all these years of kind of creating that network, because I think that's what really gets us through those difficult moments.
And if you were, as we speak to the listeners here, if somebody is, dealing with a career change or something in their corporate culture that's challenging, what would be one thing that you would advise them that they could do today that would set them on a track for a brighter future, so to speak?
Yeah, I would say asking a lot of questions. And I say that because I think I spent, or maybe wasted a lot of time assuming that I knew what people wanted, or how, or what they expected of me, or what I needed to be. And when I look back, I can see the incredible amount of self-judgment and the
Mm,
kind of inflated self-expectation that, I was thinking I had to be like this and I had to be perfect in all of these areas, and realizing I was constantly feeling a failure because what I was expecting of myself was so far beyond what anybody in those roles ever would have expected out of anybody. And so now that I've got this network of people that I'm working with, I get to see like, wow, Shaun, you actually could have been fine with just the area that you're really good in. It would have provided so much value, but against this super inflated expectation, everything felt like a failure. So
yeah,
all of
that's
that
sometimes
happened.
we are our worst enemies.
Oh my God. I mean, and by the way, sometimes people know that they've got a self-critical voice. Excuse me. Other times, I think some of that is under the radar. We don't realize, especially in a pivot like that. My mind's pretty radical, that we form a vision without realizing it of how we're supposed to be, how the situation is, and all of that. And what I realized is nothing moves nearly as fast as I thought it does. People are still grappling with all of their human stuff too. And the only way to go through this is through a conversation and an inquiry and creating. And once I finally got that in my bones, everything started to flow so much easier. And I think that that applies to any kind of transition. People want to have good
Yeah.
people around them. Nobody expects anybody to come out of the gate perfect and fully loaded. So I think there's a lot of rediscovering having compassion for myself became a critical piece of that.
Beautiful. Beautiful. So ask questions, everybody. Ask questions because don't assume that you know what people want. And that's not just in business, that's in relationships too. People are not mind readers, it's like ask them what they want. I remember I'm married 30 years now, but my ex-husband for Christmas one year got me sheets for the bed. I was like, wow, that's definitely not what I wanted. It would have been useful if you had asked me what I wanted because sheets was not it. So hint, 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 ask people what they want in every context because then you're more likely to actually have them win and you win, you know?
It, you're right. It shows up all the time. Whether it's easy to see in personal conflicts. Sometimes somebody will be telling me about some beef at work or with a relationship. So, well, what did they have to say about it? Well, they're just. Da, 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 da. I'm like, no, no, hold on. Did you actually ask them? Well, I already know. Like, no, no. Did that person actually tell you? Do you actually understand their role? And then you realize we operate off of assumptions so often. And that's something
So often,
I
yeah.
was, look, I was intimidated in the beginning. I had people who were asking me to come and help them on their companies who had personally coached. So I'd go in with this self-doubt, uh, financial company or some company that I didn't have a background in, and I was a lot of imposter syndrome, wondering
Yes.
how am
People
I going
deal
to
with
make a
that all the
difference?
time.
Yeah, I mean, I don't, I thought I had to be an expert at their business. Fast forward, I look back, I'm like, no, people just needed my particular perspective because they already knew their business.
Yes.
They had an issue with their people and how they were communicating. Like that, I could do in
Yeah,
any
that's a different
setting.
story.
And I think I suffered far longer than I needed to. So, I mean, if there's anything for people listening,
Yeah,
when you
end
just
the
start to,
suffering sooner.
yeah, guys, but the self expectation of that I'm supposed to know all this and somehow be psychic, I think we do. It's not even helping the other person.
No, it doesn't. And it doesn't help. Whenever I have people on my team, I always get really clear about what are their expectations and I make it clear what my expectations are. Otherwise, you have a recipe for upset and ineffectiveness and burnout.
Yeah.
Because if people experience that they're not meeting expectations, even if they're unsaid and they're not even the person's expectations, they're their own expectations in their own head and they're failing, like you're saying, it's a recipe for burnout. You get disconnected from who you
Yeah.
really are, which is actually what I heard you say when you were going through that difficult transition
Hmm.
is you got disconnected. This is in my words, and you tell me if it's off, but you got disconnected from who you really are and started to identify with the job as who you were. So when the job went away, you felt lost. But when
Hmm.
you reconnected with who you really are, which is this whole desire to impact people, everything went into flow.
Yeah. That's why you're the best because you nail it on the head. And it really was. Well, look, and think of all that. How much we're talking about career transitions too inside this is how much of our identity is based on our money, our job. Um, and I think we can
Our
all understand that.
relationships, our
Yeah.
past,
I mean, by the way, throughout this entire time, I went through a heartbreaking breakup. I went through recovering
Of course,
surgery. I mean, like there was a moment there. I'm like, felt
What
like
else you got, God? What
yeah,
else you
like
got?
yeah, I'm all literally in bed on my back with my leg in the air, and it's you know second guessing. But there's also a strange catharsis in that when you have to get that we are none of those. And if I think you know me, I jokingly but knowingly call myself a recovering intellectual. I always have to know the answer and have to figure it out and using this. And when you bump up against the severe limitations of that, and you realize like there's no creation if you're waiting for the proof to show up first, and
It's
that
the
and that was the
antithesis of
biggest wallop upside
creation.
the head.
Yeah.
Yeah, like you can't. We talk, manifesting is probably these huge buzzword now, and but if you're only basing it on what I can actually see, then you're kind of missing the real magic of it. It was definitely in that trap for a while.
Well, I think that people, it's like being a painter. If you have to paint by numbers, the numbers are there so you can follow it. But when you paint from nothing, that's real creation.
Yes,
And almost all the work that I do with people is getting them to nothing, which is really the work because then when there's nothing there, vision is immediate. You can
right.
see. You can't see through a bunch of stuff that's there in the way. So it's like getting to nothing so you can look up and out at what do you really want? What are you creating? Not what are you adapting? What are you fixing? What are you creating from
And
nothing? And that's a very beautiful space.
it is beautiful, and yet I think, well, you're so steeped in this from, I mean, even your childhood. But what I notice with people is that the concept of that can actually be really scary. There's
People are
loss of
afraid of
significance.
nothing.
Yeah, I
Literally, you're
know. It's
afraid
like
of nothing.
like don't give me so many options, or what would I have to let go of? And it's almost like even if what you have to let go of is the thing that would serve you the most, the process of letting go can be terrifying. The moment it happens,
Yep.
it's like, oh my God, how the hell was I ever living like that before? I mean, it's so common and almost a stereotype, but the act of being able to let that stuff go, to get to nothing, I think fills people with a lot more trepidation than we realize.
Well, it's why in prison, there's such a high rate of recidivism, which means, going back to prison because people are used to their cells. They
Right?
know where everything is in the cell. They know they get their extra yard time on Thursdays. They get their extra pudding on Fridays. They know where the paints are. They know. So when somebody says, no, 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 there's no cell, just go to the open, you're free. That can be very intimidating for people because it's
Yeah.
better the devil you know. Familiar seems safer, which now circles back to what you said earlier, that in companies, people are incentivized to make safe decisions
Yeah.
rather than, the kind of risk that is involved with creation. It's safe to paint by the numbers and it might even look good, but creating from nothing is where the magic is. And there's no magic in painting by the numbers.
It's funny. It just had me thinking back about the person I mentioned earlier, who, like I said, was in this banking environment. And we realized if you're really going to talk about being exceptional, or in this case, becoming that higher level executive, and you look at, well, what does that really entail? It's the person who's going to say the thing that nobody else is saying, the person who's going to call out the elephant in the room, the person
Yeah.
who is saying, I'm not just here for myself, I'm looking at the bigger picture about what's really needed in this situation. And you start to see in there, it's the people who actually are willing to step outside of that safe, you know, agreement
Yeah.
reality,
That
looking
little
good,
bubble.
are the people who will seemingly magically make these huge leaps as if it was easy,
Yeah.
but it was really where they're coming from and where they're
And they
standing.
have to be willing to fail. They can't be
Right,
afraid of failure because failure, to me, when I work with people, I always say, whether you succeed or fail, if you succeed, woohoo, you got those results.
right.
But if you fail, then we'll be able to see what got in your way. And that's just as valuable as producing a result in many cases.
Well, and also exercising that muscle. I mean, your husband and I both do jujitsu, which is one of the more humbling of physical pursuits, and it looks like losing over and over and over again, and
Over and over.
hard to perceive the progress though. And yet, anybody who's
Yeah.
hung in there for a year or two suddenly gets this point of like, how did I actually get good at something when I felt like I was failing the entire time? And it sneaks up on you. But I feel like that's where people miss the value of failure.
Yeah. I think I'm with you spot on. I think you're spot on about that. And in that vein, what I do like to do from time to time is offer myself up to be of service to you as my guest. And if there's anything that you want to you want to get coached in, something that's not moving the way you want it to, something that you experience not having fulfilled yet and not knowing how to, and how can I support you?
Well, we were talking about this right before. I got inspired by the free course that you have on money on your site with Robin.
Tyrone and
Tyra,
Robin. Yeah.
yeah. Um, because as you know, I come from, yeah, I moved to New York and I was living the proverbial starving artist lifestyle for so long. Um, I love the career transition I'm on, and it's really great to be doing work that I really love. But this idea around money and passive income has been one of those nebulous ideas out there in the future, I just kind of got kicked in the pants by it recently when I watched the video that you sent me. And so it's something that you literally just from listening to it was like, oh, that's a whole new area that I've just not been on my radar. But I noticed this kind of I don't know enough about it to really do anything about it. That's what's kind of there for me about
Perfect. Perfect. Well, first of all, you and I both know without actions, there are no results, right?
it. Right,
But the idea of residual income for most people, it's foreign because how they view money is I'm going to exchange my time or my services for dollars. That's how it
right,
is. The the problem with a time for money model, which is almost everything,
right,
is that there's a finite amount of time.
right.
So therefore, there is a finite amount of money. that you're going to make. I mean, you can increase your rates and, but at some point it's,
Yeah. If you
the
get sick, you're good luck,
that's it.
or
You're out, you got nothing. And one of the things, since I've been working with actors for so many years, that I was always really aware of, but not to the degree that you and I are talking about it, like I could generate it. It was more that actors would do a day on a TV show or a week on a TV show, and then for years they get residual
right.
payments. And most of the money that they made wasn't from the day on the commercial or on the TV show, it was from the residuals.
Hmm.
That's where they really made the money. So that's where I started to get like, there's got to be a way to do this, not just as an actor, because I don't want to do that, so I was like, okay, I don't want to be an artist again, right? So
Right.
and even songwriters, because I was in the music business, as the royalty payments for a song are, more than what you're making to sing live. I mean, unless you're Taylor Swift or something like that. So the question is, how do you generate residual income? Now, the way that I've begun to do it is, as you saw with my wealth coach, is stock trading. And
Hmm.
that was something that was so scary for me because I didn't know anything about the stock market. It just seemed like, well, there's people that know about that and
Right.
I'm not one of
That's
them. And if, it's like
even in
gambling.
New
It's
York
like, I'm
City,
going to
it's
go to
right there. It's
Vegas.
still a world away.
I Yeah, it's there, but it's like the Emerald City. Like you don't
Yeah.
really know what's going on in there, So,
Yeah.
I'm out with the lions and tigers and bears. I don't know what's going on in that silver tower. So I started to learn about stock trading and very simple stuff, but when you don't know anything about it, it just seems like this is too scary. And once I started learning about it, something flipped for me, Shaun, where I
Mm.
was like, "Oh my God, if I had known this at 20, everything would be different financially because you can begin to generate a residual income very quickly
Hmm.
if you start implementing these tools, right? So that's one thing, and I can, send you to Tyrone's website to start watching videos, and I can, certainly support you with that. But then I started thinking about this whole world of residual income, and I said, there's got to be other ways too, right? So if you look at Amazon, the biggest thing they sell is books. Now, there's 6 things that you are an expert on that you don't even think about that you could write an ebook about. It would cost you
Right.
nothing to do. You could get somebody to do cover art. You're an artist. You could, take the picture and do the
Probably
art
have some
on it.
photos already. Right.
Exactly. And then within, days, have a product on Amazon. And all you have to do is find out what are the keywords, what are the topics that are being most searched on Amazon. Amazon's going to be the seller. So they're already, if you search, a book on photography, the photography books come up. So they're doing the sales work for you, other than learning about SEO, and that's a very simple thing. There's Google, YouTube videos
Right.
on it. It's super simple, but you could have an ebook within a week that could be generating you residual income. And then with your coaching, all you have to do is have a video evergreen course that's up there that doesn't require you to be there to do the
Right.
live coaching. And now all of a sudden, you have a source of residual income. So there are so many people that don't realize there's something, even if it's a recipe book, it doesn't have to be a novel. It doesn't have to be, an encyclopedia of knowledge about XYZ. You could do a word puzzle book. They're hugely successful on Amazon. You can't imagine. And there's also resources where you can learn about all this stuff too, but you don't have to spend a lot of money to learn about it and start generating.
Yeah.
Even if it's a small amount per month, all of a sudden you start to see the possibility of having residual income
Yes.
streams. Also, what a lot of people don't realize with the stock market, if you are an investor in the stock market, you get paid to own shares in most stocks that are Dow dividend paying stocks. So if you can generate dividends and then set your account to have those dividends be sent home to you rather than reinvested, because automatically they get reinvested,
Uh-huh.
unless you tell your financial advisor or your account to send that money home. All of a sudden now you start getting quarterly checks home.
Hmm. It's so funny. It's the second you start just laying out a few examples, then I can start to see like, oh, wait, hold on. The possibility of residual income has to be there. That opens up the space to look.
Exactly. Because if
Because
you don't
now
have
there's,
the
yeah, there's investing,
possibility,
there's this, there's that. It could be buying a property and using it on Airbnb, but it's also your getaway vacation property for 1 week a month. Or there's ways to do it that, yeah, I think,
it's just you're basically you just have to get out of the mindset that you're required, because if you're
right.
required, it's a time for dollars exchange and you're limited. If you don't have to be there, it's unlimited, it's infinite, your return is infinite.
It's so funny. I don't know if this is there for other people. It can have that part of my brain kick in, like, yeah, but I don't know exactly how. Therefore,
That's
you
when
see
you ask, that's when you have to ask who. So you Google. I
right.
mean, thank God for Google. There's a company that is, for the ebook thing, the Mickelson twins or something, that they've been very, very successful at this. And, I have a friend who's making $10,000 a month on books that he knows nothing about. He wrote a book on how to learn Italian, and it's like one of the number one books. He wrote it in English, had it translated into Italian, and now it's selling like crazy on Amazon.
Wow.
I mean,
And I mean, it's really crazy. So I'm writing a book right now on the topic of trusted leadership, and it's interesting. I think everybody's using ChatGPT to do all their writing, and it's been really interesting because on one hand, I'll throw stuff into it and give it some instructions, and I learn about writing. And at the same time, what I have got is that having a unique voice and a unique perspective has actually become so prized these days in a sea of bland, normal, all that stuff. And so I just start to think of, there's people who've come to me and said, well, you should do a whole series on innovation using photography as your metaphor. I'm like,
if I were you, I would just, look at what are the photography books being bought, what are the top selling photography books being bought. Look at their sites, and then you know so much about photography, and it could be very simple for you. You could get AI to help you, but it doesn't have to be complex. It doesn't have to be overly complicated. People don't want to read overly complicated.
right. And and you realize that if you can just deliver something of value, and
Exactly.
but separate from providing personal value, what you're also speaking to is the, hey, I don't even need to be there. My value might just be taking a tiny bit of money and sticking it in something. And so
And
that's been getting
hiring a
pretty.
ghostwriter or hiring a book design, cover
Yeah,
designer, whatever it is, for a very small investment, you have something that can return. That's a seed you planted that will sprout year after year after year after
yeah.
year, month after month after month. So I would definitely, if I were you, I would look into the trading for sure, because I love it so much. I'm like addicted to
I
it at
know.
this
Now that
point.
you're into it, I'm kind of getting into it just by your
It's
enthusiasm.
so cool. I'll put in the show notes a link to the video that you've been talking about with Tyrone
And
and
Robin.
Robin Quivers from the Howard Stern show. But what is it that you want to leave people with and offer them? I know you have something that is
Yeah.
incredibly valuable.
So we've focused on this area of trust. If you think about anything you want to accomplish in life, without trust, good luck. If you don't have it in your
Yeah.
personal relationships or between your team members. So I spent a lot of time really focusing on this topic, and that's a lot of the work we do with companies. But we created a little primer for people. What are some, we talk about trust, this amorphous term. Well, how do you get down to how to actually start to implement it? So we have a guide. It'll be on my website, trustedleadership.co. So anybody wants to go there, sign up for the newsletter, and I'll give you a copy of this. But it's a really quick, easy primer to look at your own life and how to start to amplify and create trust so that you're getting results faster with hopefully a little more peace of mind, satisfaction, and fulfillment.
Beautiful. Trust is key. So, those of you listening, make sure to go to trustedleadership.co. I'll put it in the show notes as well so that you can get that free guide, the primer for you to be able to amplify the trust in your life, which will amplify everything in terms of your power, your well being, your peace of mind, and your effectiveness. So, that's pretty good. I would say that's a pretty good bang for your click.
No buts
Thank
needed.
you so much. Yes, exactly. Thank you so much for being on the show today, Shaun. I so appreciate the conversation. And, is there anything else you want to leave people with in terms of last
No,
words?
I so appreciate this. I appreciate you and your impact in my life, and it's just a testament to what happens when you start plugging yourself in and get amazing coaches around you. So I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure we will, to be continued. Let's put it that way.
To be continued.
Okay. And for those of you listening, watching, however you get your podcast, if you learned something today, if you got value, please rate and write a short review. It makes a big difference. But most importantly, share the episode with whoever you think would get value out of the content of this conversation. All right. We'll see you on the next episode of Be Unmessable with, the podcast.
If you're starting to see that leadership isn't about control, it's about trust, then it's time to move from insight into action. So I want you to download the free guide to moving beyond motivation and into action. And that is designed, I designed this especially for you to stop waiting for the right moment, stop waiting for the right mood, and start leading from intention, clarity, and follow through. You're going to find the link right below this episode. But here's the truth. Motivation is fleeting. Trust is earned. And if you want to be the kind of leader that others can count on, then you've got to start becoming someone you can count on, trusting yourself. So in this next video, that's where we break it down.